Hello, and welcome to the Route 50 Pulse Check, a new interview series focused on highlighting how mayors, governors, and county executives are stepping up to address some of the most pressing issues of the day. My name is Alicia Powell Gillis, and I am the senior editor at Route 50, as well as your host. Joining me for this edition of Pulse Check is Providence, Rhode Island Mayor Jorge Elorza. Mayor Elorza, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you, Alicia, and always happy to talk about the pressing issues of the day, as you mentioned.
Excellent. Well, let's get started with the most pressing issue of the day, which we are recording this the day after Election Day. So I know we're having this conversation. We do not yet know what the outcome is of the biggest prize of the day, which is the presidential election. But regardless of who is going to be sitting in the Oval Office come January 20th, I want to understand from you what you hope the relationship between federal and local governments will look like in the next 4 years, and what changes you wish to see in that relationship.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Alicia. And you're right, we are in this surreal moment of purgatory. Well, we're in limbo right now, not knowing exactly what the outcome is going to be, but we do know that the outcome will be determined very soon. But as you mentioned, regardless of the outcome, the problems that we've had for the past 4 years, many of them are going to continue. And many of them have just been increased over the past 6 months to 12 months. And so, those are major challenges that we have to confront as a society, and we have to figure out some way, somehow to address it. And what I believe we've been seeing over the past maybe decade and a half is the federal government retreating from its leadership responsibility on many of these issues that afflict our communities, especially issues that affect our urban communities. And so, I look at it from our perspective here at the municipal level. We don't get any points by, say, winning a debate, right? The currency of purchase in this game is solving problems, being solutions oriented. And it does me no good to, get on and, go back and forth and engage in or even win a debate. That's not what my constituents are looking for. They're looking for results. And they're asking me not to be ideological. They're asking me to be evidence-based, data-driven, and practical. So that's how we operate here at the local level. So you name the issue. We've seen a retreat from the federal government. We can start with, say, climate change. And the United States was part of the International Climate Accord, the Paris Agreement. We backed out, but as the federal government backed out, there were a number of cities, over 400 to this point, that stepped into that role and said, nonetheless, we're going to abide by these terms and play that leadership role. When you look at issues such as immigration, again, it's another area where cities and towns, we've taken it upon ourselves to play a leadership role because the rubber meets the road here in our home communities. And so we have to step up, whether it be a matter of ideology or a matter of practicality. We have to step up to address these issues here locally. And then the last issue that comes to mind is, remembering that many of the challenges that we're facing and the divisions that we're having as a society, they're based on the fact that many folks are being left behind. Or if they're not being left behind, at least they feel as though they're being left behind. And the greatest equalizer in our society should be our education system. But unfortunately, it hasn't been, especially in urban communities for a long time. But let's remember that only 8% of school funding comes from the federal government. All the levers that move the needle when it comes to socioeconomic mobility, they live in our communities. So it only makes sense by extension that the solutions lie at this level. Now we hope that whoever's in the Oval Office will see cities as a partner in the work that we all have to do together. But unfortunately, that's not the trend that we have been seeing. So we stand ready to work with anyone who wants to support our communities and help us collectively move forward as a society. And I hope that whoever is in the White House, in the next couple of months, that they'll bring that attitude to see us as allies, to see us as partners, and to recognize that mayors are getting stuff done every single day. And if the federal government isn't going to lead, then stay out of our way, because we will fill that leadership void and do whatever we need to do to move our communities forward.
Well, speaking of leadership and mayors, I know most of the focus obviously is on the presidential election, but there are new mayors that have been elected last night. And so I'm just kind of curious for you. Obviously, you've been a mayor for quite some time now. What advice do you have for those mayors elect who will be stepping into this place where cities and urban areas are more having to step up and fill leadership voids? So what advice do you have for them?
So three things come to mind. The first one is very basic. You are an executive, and you really need to focus a lot of time on building the infrastructure within your administration to get stuff done. You are only one person, and there's very little that you can do alone. You need to leverage all the resources that you have around you. So think in that way. So that's number one. The second thing that comes to mind is, when you've done this job for long enough, you reflect back on your time, and every time you reflect back and you understand this job, this role a little bit more, you always adopt a more expansive view of what the job entails. So, we're all practical, so we work with what we're given. But don't ever be afraid, and always look out for those opportunities to reshuffle the deck to entirely change the landscape in which you're operating. So navigating that balance, being practical and working with what you have, but also flipping the script and developing a new reality. And that's the challenge that you should always think about moving forward. And then the last piece of advice is, yes, you are the administrator, and ultimately you are responsible for everything. But your community is also looking for leadership. They're looking for a voice that speaks their values and that translates those values into actual work and results. And so lean into that role. And remember that you are only as strong as the connection that you have with your own residents. So speak up on issues that really matter to you, and remember that this is a great privilege to do, not for you as an individual, not for you as a person, but it's a privilege for what you can contribute as a community member to your entire society around you. So it's an incredible perch, and it's an incredible platform to move ideas and initiatives forward, and make sure that you use that for all that it counts to make your community as best you can. And if I could offer one last piece of advice, Alicia, another practical piece. As mayor, it's not like you're an executive. It's not like being a congressperson. It's not like being in the legislature. Let's say a 2-year term in the legislature, you're making maybe 1 or 2 really consequential, important decisions on votes a year or a term. But it's different. I mean, at the municipal level, as an executive, you make consequential decisions every day, and you're never going to make everybody happy. If you try to make everybody happy, you're going to make nobody happy. And so the fact that you're always going to tick people off with the decisions you make, there's something counterintuitively very liberating about that you're going to tick people off regardless. So you might as well just follow your conscience and do what you believe is right. And then at the end of the day, if someone is upset at you for a decision you made Tuesday, well, guess what? Well, next week, you're going to make another decision that's going to make that constituency happy. And at the end of the day, they will judge you on that entire record. So don't try to please folks. Follow your conscience and stand up for the issues that you really believe in.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of consequential decision-making, I want to shift topics to the pandemic, because you and as well as these new mayors who will be coming on have been dealing with the pandemic for, at this point, it's been 8 months. So just curious, in your city, where are you today as it pertains to COVID-19, and how is the city's response going?
So it's just such a difficult situation. 6 months ago, it was challenging because we didn't know enough about the virus, how it functioned, how it spread, how to treat it. And so it was very difficult because it was just a land of uncertainty. But we were also in a landscape where if the government, if the city or the state, if we recommended certain restrictions, people were in much more of a mood to follow those that guidance. It's a different landscape now. So thankfully, we know a lot more about it. So we know how to limit transmission, social distancing and wearing masks. We know how to treat it, so it's a lot less deadly than it was before. So, fewer people, the mortality rate is going down. But the landscape now, there's total COVID fatigue that exists in our community. And now that we see numbers start to creep back up, we have a good sense of what measures you should put in place in an ideal world to limit the continued spread. But we're so far from living in that ideal world. We also understand that these measures are only as good as people are willing to follow them. And we might suggest or impose restrictions that make total sense from a scientific standpoint, but from a reality standpoint, they're not going to be followed. And so imposing these restrictions could be actually counterproductive, lead to more harm than good. So it's a challenge. All of these are really difficult decisions that we're going through every day. But the guidance that I give to my team and what we use to make these decisions here in the city are, first of all, let's listen to the scientists, right? Let's understand this from a scientific data evidence perspective as much as possible. And then second, let's be very, very conscious of not just the consequences, but the potential unintended consequences of the decisions. So I'll give you a concrete example. We were having a conversation a couple of days ago around our basketball courts throughout the city. So we have most of our basketball hoops back on, and it's a challenge because kids come together, people come together, they're playing basketball, and I'm virtually certain that there's community spread happening there. On the flip side of that, so we can certainly close down the basketball courts, take down the hoops, but on the flip side of that, then all we would be doing is pushing those same kids to congregate somewhere else indoors. And there might be just as much, if not more, community spread in those settings. And so thinking through not just the immediate effect, but unintended consequences. And so just being very thoughtful with what we put out there. So whenever we impose restrictions, and lately it's been the state imposing them and us following their guidance, we try to couple that with a strong communications campaign and a strong support campaign. So if we need folks to stop what they're doing, well, we want to offer them other outlets. If we need them to put on a mask, well, we want to offer them the mask that they need. If businesses have to take it outside, then we're closing down streets and we're providing and connecting them with heaters. So understanding that everything is interconnected, and any little push here comes with a pull in the opposite direction, and being ready to provide the support so that we're not imposing more hurt on people right now, because it's hard enough as it is, and we don't want to lose them. We want to support our community as much as possible, and so that's the guidance that we use as we go into this really trying, difficult moment where the cases are beginning to spike back up.
Right. As you said, we are about to hit this. We are in this trying moment, and experts are saying this is probably going to be worse than what we saw the first go around with the pandemic. And as you alluded to, there is the COVID fatigue. So while, as you said, you do know what works, you're thinking about the consequences and the unintended consequences. But what might you need to be kind of shifting in terms of your strategy? I heard you talk about communications, and what about that you need to kind of change to kind of understand people are feeling fatigue, but also kind of help them understand that these are still the right decisions to be making, and help them kind of keep them going along, even though it's been 8 months and it'll be several more months of following these guidance that you and your colleagues are putting out.
In crises such as this, especially ones that are that put potential lives at stake, it's important to communicate very clearly, to communicate repeatedly, and to communicate consistently. The unfortunate part of this is that our folks are receiving very different messages from different levels of government. Our president has been very vocal about diminishing the role of face masks, and not encouraging people to use them. And so it's really important for us to understand that there is that level of information that folks are receiving, and to not just match but also outbalance those messages with messages directly from us on, what the doctors and scientists are telling us that we should do. So fighting that misinformation and false information is something that we have to continuously navigate. So I'm on the radio constantly, reminding folks of the threat and urging them to take these important steps to keep themselves and our community safe. So that's certainly one thing. The other piece of this is the economic impact that this is having, not just from a personal health standpoint, but from a fiscal and economic health standpoint. And many local businesses, especially the very small ones, they're on the brink right now, and that's causing a lot of anxiety, and it's causing a lot of pressure. So what we want to do is work with them and also work with the state to put as much of the CARES Act dollars as possible in their hands so that they can use this as productively as possible. Now, the challenge there is there are different ways that we can go about it. We can just put cash in people's hands and give grants out to businesses. But at the same time, if you spread it out if you spread those dollars out so widely, then you can't have the impact on business to business. And there might be many businesses, the unfortunate reality being that even with some government support, some of that CARES Act dollars, they still may not be able to make it. So how do you work with the businesses and the industries where you have the right level of support that can sustain them to get them to the other side? Again, that's a really tricky, difficult balance. But my role has been working with our business community and being an advocate at the state so that they understand the pressures and the realities that our entrepreneurs are facing, so that the state is better equipped to support them. And then the last point, part of the challenge that we have here is that not just here in Providence, but in every city throughout the country, we're also seeing spikes in violence. And in particular, violent crime, shootings, stabbings, homicides. And, I believe that what we're seeing right now is what happens when the social structures and the social supports for young people and for families in need breaks down. Usually we have a rich environment where kids can have recreation programs, summer camps, summer jobs. There are community activities to bring neighbors together. And what we try to do is support our families proactively so that they don't veer off and go down the wrong path. But we haven't been able to offer those programs in the same way that we have in the past. And combined with the economic anxiety and just the pent up, sort of built up pressure, and that we're all feeling because of COVID, it's led to additional violence out on the streets. So how do we manage the calls for social justice and racial justice, while at the same time making sure that we're taking just some common sense, basic steps to keep our community safe? So it's a challenging environment right now. It's challenging, and we're navigating as best we can. And it really is an amazing time to be in these positions right now, because your leadership is needed more than ever. So it's definitely a call to action in a way that it has never been, at least in recent memory.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue to kind of move us to the next portion of this conversation. Is obviously racial injustices, as you alluded to, have been the part of the story of COVID has been around equity. And then with the summer after the killing of George Floyd, we've talked a lot about racial injustice as pertains to law enforcement. So, but as you alluded to, there are increases in crime that we're also seeing. So I'm curious to hear from you how to go a little bit deeper and to talk about how do you want to implement police reform, but also balance that with public safety needs of your city, and then also balance the need for racial healing in cities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll share with you what we've done here in Providence. And we've learned along the way. I think there are a lot of things that we're doing right, and there are a lot of things that we need to do better on. But I'll share with you what the approach that we've taken here. So I started meeting with a group of leaders from the Black community maybe about a month or so into COVID, where we started seeing that it was having a disproportionate impact on communities of color. So I created an African American ambassador group that I met with weekly to talk about how we respond to the needs in the community around COVID. But then everything really took a different course after the George Floyd murder. And after that, our conversations intentionally turned to structural racism, and beyond that, tackling anti-Blackness here in our city. So this group of maybe 20 or so ambassadors has grown to over 100, and we meet every single week. For the past 6 months, I've personally been part of every single one of these hour-and-a-half conversations. And what we've done is we've lifted the voice of the Black community. We've allowed them to lead and tell us what our priorities should be. So we have a structure in place. We have subcommittees. We have staff assigned to every committee. There's so much rich work that's being done. And just yesterday during the elections, on November 3rd, we had this major victory where the official state name is the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. And the reference to Providence Plantations is offensive to people in our community, especially the Black and Indigenous community. And out of this committee came, let's make a push to change the state name. Let's pass legislation to put it on the ballot and then form a campaign to change the state name. So we went through all of that. We put it to voters. And just yesterday, we saw that the results came in, and the state of Rhode Island, our voters voted to approve the name change to eliminate the plantations from our official name. This is an amazing, amazing victory for this group of ambassadors. The idea came from them, and the work has been done by them, and this is real deep structural change that's happening. So the way that we've addressed it is allow the voices of the community to lead. And what I have learned through this process is that the injuries, they run so deep. And if we really want to make the most out of this moment for real change, then we have to go to the source. And so out of these conversations and this process, we also launched a process around truth-telling, reconciliation, and reparations, where to my knowledge, the only city in the country that's going through this entire process and doing it this way. And we're trying to form a larger coalition of cities that are working on this too. So there's a lot happening on the racial justice front. As part of that is the police reform front. And this is an issue that there's no right answer to it. There's no right approach. But what we've done is, first of all, recognize that some of the horrific things that we've seen from other departments, those are departments that are light years behind where we are as a police department. Not to say that we're perfect, not by any means, but many of the reforms that police departments across the country have been adopting over the past several months, those are things that we've done like 20 years ago. And there's a reason why we haven't had any of these incidents here in Providence. Not how you've seen on these videos. And so it's important for us to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a strong foundation for us to build in. And so how do we bring in certain common sense reforms that need to happen, while at the same time making the investments in policing that are required to keep our community safe. So this is another thing where it's all about process and engaging the community. So everything from doing an operations audit in our police department to see how we can provide better services to the community, while at the same time freeing police officers from performing some duties that they're not trained or best equipped to do, to also looking at other services that we can provide, and making sure that be it mental health or suicide prevention, homeless services, noise complaints, fender bender traffic accidents, that we're deploying the appropriate person, the appropriately trained professional for those situations, and not necessarily a person with a badge and a gun, because they may not be the best trained or the person best equipped to do it. So there's a lot of work happening there. But again, this is an area where cities are leading the way. you aren't seeing any leadership at a national level at this. If anything, you're just seeing gaslighting and more instigation. But that doesn't get us anywhere as a community. We have to be practical, and we have to work with all of our constituents to move these reforms forward, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, as we approach the end of our time, and as you again alluded to about cities leading the way, I'm curious, and for you personally, how this very trying, very intense year has maybe altered or reinforced your notion of what leadership means.
Yeah, it's definitely reinforced it, in that leadership matters. We're seeing that at the national level. Yeah, the administration's response to COVID has been a disaster. And when you think about us as a country, especially in the way that we're viewed internationally, and I've heard it said that as Americans, we're used to being envied, we're used to even being hated, but we're not used to being pitied. And our response to COVID has been so dismal that we're being pitied by the rest of the world. Ostensibly we're the most powerful democracy in the history of the world, but we can't do basic things such as keep our community safe. It's embarrassing, and that all comes from the top. Leadership matters, and it's been reinforced with our response here in the city. With all the challenges that we have had. And I believe that we've managed this pandemic as good as it can be. And now what we're doing is looking around the bend and looking for the next crisis that's on its way. And that's frankly the economic and the fiscal crisis. Now, again, if there's no leadership in Washington and there's no next round of stimulus, then we're going to be feeling the hurt here in our local communities. And we will continue to ask for support from the federal government. But we're certainly not banking on it. We'll do what we need to do as best we can to keep our community safe, and those principles of connecting the work that you do with real results in improving people's lives. That's where leadership comes in, and we don't shirk from that task. We can't scapegoat or point the finger at anyone else. The rubber meets the road here at the local level. And we're up to whatever challenge comes our way, which unfortunately, I wish it wasn't that way. I wish we would have other supports. But if we have to handle it here on our own, then we're ready, willing, and able to do
that. I know that, as you just said, there's probably another crisis that we've got to be prepared for. But even though there are probably other things around the bend that will be difficult and challenging for you as a leader, I'm kind of curious to also hear, though, what maybe are you optimistic about for the future?
So one of the things I'm absolutely optimistic about is exactly what we're talking about the devolution of power and influence in politics from Washington coming to the local level. So I guess a kind of progressive federalism idea. And we're closer to the problem. And this is where solutions are happening. It used to be said that states were the laboratories of democracy or laboratories for experimentation. That's the local community now. All of that is happening in cities. And more and more, Washington is proving itself not just unwilling, but also, frankly, incapable of addressing the challenges that we face. The country is just too diverse. It's too big. It's too big and too different. And what is part of the beauty and the strength of our form of government is that power is dispersed among many different elected officials. And I am very, very optimistic that if more influence and power comes to folks in these offices at the mayoral level, that we're going to be more responsive, and we're going to usher in a better future for our constituents than if we go in the opposite direction, where more power is concentrated in Washington.
Well, Mayor Elorza, we've reached the end of our time, but I want to thank you for your very frank and wonderful comments for us today. So thank you again for your time, and we'll be on the lookout for all the great work you continue to do in Providence.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Alicia. I appreciate it. And thank you for helping us get the word out. And I'll just end off with this last point, that we often say that there are three main political parties in the United States. There are Republicans, there are Democrats, and there are mayors. And mayors are just focused on getting stuff done every single day.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you again, sir. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You be well.
And now a word from our underwriters.
Hi, I'm Ann Duncan. I'm a Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer at Dell Technologies, and I'm part of a team of Chief Strategy and Innovation Officers. And our role is to help state and local government CIOs be more effective. We help them by delivering the Dell value proposition from the edge to the core to the cloud. Today, Rob Silverberg, who's responsible for our Digital Cities Initiative, is going to tell us a little more about that.
Thank you, Ann. And hi, everyone. Rob Silverberg. I lead the Dell Technologies focus for digital cities for North America. I've been focused on our smart city strategy for the last 5 years. And what I've seen is that there's been a great evolution over the last few years in terms of what was experiments with technology several years ago are now producing real actionable results for our city customers. These sort of results that we're seeing are improvements in transportation, improvements in public safety, the ability to become a more data-driven city, and leveraging new data sources from connected devices, as well as data sources from across the city organization for actionable intelligence. So the real outcomes that we're working on and hoping to work on with our city customers going forward are producing real manageable results from our smart city initiatives.